Chapter 32. It's not very big, is it? I asked, catching my first glimpse of the city as we cleared the last of the mountain peaks and started dropping down into town. Actually, there are about the same number of people here as the valley, except here they're all in one metro area, not stretched out in a string of smaller communities. Gavin said from the back seat. Where first? Devon asked. My appointment with Ms. Watson is in 2.5 hours. I checked the clock in the dash. And let me guess, you're starving. Devon shot me a quick grin. You know I am. Making a person takes a lot of energy. He was silent for a couple minutes, his attention on the highway in front of us. Wait, we usually go see the local Aniquitos first. Before we meet with the non-shifter. We do, but Bill told me that because we have legitimate business, we can see her first. If I don't think we can shift her, we finish our business, pay our respects to the Aniquitos, and go. If I think we can do it, we've just saved a day. Another reason for the new job, Devon reasoned. Maybe not a reason, but a definite advantage. I watched out the window as the desert scrub faded into houses and businesses on either side of the highway. A little bit later, Devon steered the car off the highway and onto a surface street. There's our hotel over there. He pointed it out as we passed the tallest building I'd seen yet. It looked about 5 stories. What do you want to eat? I thought about it for a split second before answering, meat? Steak sounds great. Can do. He hit a button on the dash and asked the navigation system to find a steakhouse. The computer listed several, mostly chains. Wait, Devon said. That last one, Cowpunch Steakhouse. Give me directions to that one. The voice began giving instructions. Devon followed them, taking us toward food. As we sat around the table waiting for our food and visiting, Gavin asked, Where are you supposed to meet this woman? At her shop. She has a few items I want to look at, see if they're worth hauling home. He rolled his eyes. Where's the shop? I dug my PCD out of my purse and looked up the address. 312 East Main, I gave the address. His brows shot up. Wow, that's downtown prime retail real estate. You're familiar with Yuma? I asked, surprised. Yeah, he said. I spent a couple years here before I settled into our pack. That had to be some time ago, Devon said. I knew Gavin had been with our pack and part of the enforcer team for at least 5 years. About 7 years ago, he said. That will be handy, I said. I hope you left on good terms. I would already have warned you if I hadn't. I would have recommended you bring someone else. The waitress brought our plates, and we were quiet for a while, concentrating on the food in front of us. Leaving the restaurant, we climbed back into the borrowed vehicle, and Devon followed Gavin's directions to the shop where I would meet with Ms. Watson. As Devon drove down Main Street, I was surprised at how old the buildings were, nearly 150 years, but they had obviously been well taken care of. The area had been kept up, and while it wasn't quite a historic district, you could still see a lot of history in the structures and the decor. We had to park about a half a block away from the storefront. They just hadn't planned for automobile parking when this part of town had been built. We walked the short distance to the small second-hand shop. I stopped outside a moment to look at the display in the front window. Bells tinkled as Devon opened the door and went inside first, checking the interior for possible threats before letting me follow him in, while Gavin served as rear guard, watching the street and protecting our backs. I glanced around the room, right away spotting a couple items I wanted to take a closer look at. May I help you? Asked an unfamiliar voice. I turned my attention from the contents of the shop to the young woman approaching us from the rear of the store. My nose told me she wasn't the non-shifter. Yes, I have an appointment with a Natalie Watson, I said with a smile. Sure, I'll let her know you're here. She turned and headed back the way she'd come. I wandered through the store, checking out her inventory while I waited. Devon stayed with me. Gavin appeared to be browsing himself, though I knew he was keeping a sharp eye out for anything that could be a danger. After several minutes, another woman appeared. She was 5'4" or so, and a little overweight. If she chose to shift, the faster metabolism would take care of it. "Hello," she said, reaching Devon and I. "I'm Natalie Watson. Are you Ms. Daniels?" "I am," I said, extending my hand to her. Yes, I was already in the process of taking Devon's name, but when I'd first contacted her, I'd been Daniels. It hadn't occurred to me at the time to use Wilson like I had at the doctor's office, and it wasn't worth the confusion to correct her now, so I went with Daniels. She took my hand and shook it. The instant our skin touched, I felt it. It was much like when I'd shaken hands with Reese Donovan in Seattle and Alice Treadway in Texas. Each time I had felt a non-shifter's animal form hiding inside them, but it was different. There seemed to be two forms hiding inside Natalie. I fought to keep my confusion from showing, to keep the friendly smile on my face. "If you'll come with me, I'll show you the pieces you were interested in." She turned and headed toward the small door at the back of the shop. Devon and I followed her through the store and into a cramped storage area in the back. We weaved our way along a narrow path about 20 feet long. I was glad when the walkway opened into a larger room. It was bigger, but nearly as full of merchandise as the narrow hallway. "This is the set you were interested in," she indicated the solid walnut dining set I'd contacted her about. I spent several minutes looking at the dining set. From the pictures in the advertisement, I suspected that the table and the chairs that went with it were much older than she realized. To be sure, I pulled one chair out and crawled under the table to get a good look at the construction. Satisfied, I climbed back out and asked Devon to turn one of the chairs over. He easily flipped the heavy wood seat and held it for me to inspect. "Okay," I said to Devon, and he turned it up right before setting it down again. I turned back to Natalie. "Assuming we take it, how do we get it out of here?" "There." She motioned to a large loading door I hadn't noticed. "Good. Do you mind if I look around, see if there's anything else we can take off your hands?" "Go right ahead." I spent an hour or so browsing through her storage area and shop, finding several other items. She and I negotiated for several minutes before settling on a price for everything that suited us both. I arranged a time the next afternoon to pick it all up, and we left. Gavin joining us at the car a few minutes later. "What now?" Gavin asked, opening the rear door and getting in. "Now we go check into the hotel," Devon said, starting the engine. "That's not what I meant. My appointment with the Aniquitos is tomorrow morning. We'll know more after that," I said. "So you can do it?" he asked, impatient that I wasn't telling him what he wanted to know. "I think so, but this one's different," I said. "Different how?" Devon shot me a quick, questioning look. I frowned, trying to find the words. I thought I felt two forms. "Two animal forms?" Gavin sounded taken aback by the idea. "It happens," Devon said, "when two shifters with different animal forms have children. Their children can have either form, rarely they inherit both." "I've never heard of it," Gavin said. "News to me too, but then most of this is new to me," I agreed. "It makes sense though." I thought about what that might mean for trying to shift her. I was pretty sure I could call one animal form, but would she have to choose one? Would fixing the flaw that has kept her from shifting and calling one form fix the other one? I knew that there was no one who could answer these questions for me. Right now, I was the expert in shifting non-shifters, and the best I could hope for would be educated guesses from those I trusted enough to ask. "Have you ever known a double shifter?" I asked. "Not that I know of," Devon said, "but I spend a lot of years refusing to be a part of the shifter world." I thought about it for a while longer, until Devon pulled into the parking lot of the hotel, and even afterward it lurked in the back of my mind. After checking in, we made our way up to the 5th floor to find our room. Why did you want a room on the top floor? I asked as we made our way down the hall. No rooms above ours, Devon answered. So, no footsteps and fewer voices to bother us. I concluded. No, Devon slid the key card into the slot and unlocking the door. No rooms above us that someone can use to access ours. How? I asked, confused. Down from the balcony, Gavin said. With strength and reflexes like ours, it wouldn't be difficult to drop onto our balcony from the one above. But wouldn't it be even easier to drop down from the roof? It is, but hotels, unless there's some attraction up there, like a pool, restrict roof access. We'll double-check to be sure, Devon said, moving through the 2-bedroom suite. I sighed. This is turning out to be way more complicated than I anticipated. Don't worry about it, that's our job. Devon came back from checking one bedroom and placed a light kiss on top of my head, while Gavin appeared in the other doorway, giving us the all clear. Pick a room, Devon said. I'll move our luggage in and you can get settled. I checked both rooms and found them nearly identical. I chose the one on the north wall instead of the east and waited while Devon carried our bags in. He went in the other room to talk to Gavin, and I pulled fresh clothes out of the suitcase, grabbed the overnight bag, and went into the attached bathroom for a shower. The next morning, we found a local diner for breakfast. It wasn't particularly close to the hotel, but the food was worth it. It was almost as good as Mom's cooking, and that's saying something since I'm not fond of most restaurant breakfasts. After eating, we headed to our meeting with the local Aniquitos. It had been a while since Gavin had spent much time in Yuma, and he wasn't sure where the address was, so Devon put it into the navigation system and followed the directions it gave us. I was surprised when it directed us out of town, into the midst of several orchards. The trees were heavy with fruit, which was odd this late in the year. It was freezing back home. How could there not only be fruit on the trees, but green fruit at that? It's citrus, Gavin said, seeing my confused look. Mostly oranges, but some lemons, limes, and grapefruit too. But they're green, I said. Yep, they'll come off in January or February, depending on the weather. They don't freeze? That would require the temperature to dip below freezing, he said it as if it were obvious. I couldn't help it. I turned away from the trees and looked at him. It doesn't freeze here? I didn't know whether to believe him or not. Not often. I blinked, having a hard time with the concept that it didn't freeze. Wow, I turned back to the window, not sure what else to say. Following the directions from the nav system, Devon pulled the truck into the driveway of a huge house in between two orchards, and when the voice told us we had arrived, he killed the engine. We headed up the walkway toward the front door when a large man came around the corner of the house. Can I help you? He called in our direction. My name is Nicki Wilson. I have an appointment with Mr. Echelon. I called back. He approached. I caught the scent of apples and kitsune on the air, and I knew that the man was a shifter. Who is this with you? He asked, his voice gruff. This is my husband, Devon, and our friend Gavin Waters. I replied. Come with me. He led us around to the side of the house to another entrance, a small sign above the door that read, Yuma Citrus Association Est, 1982. The large man opened the new door without knocking and let us in. It was an office, not small but cluttered just the same, as if they had run out of storage space and it had overflowed. There was an older man sitting behind the desk. Again, his scent told me he was kitsune. He looked up as we entered. The man who brought us in the front came in behind us, trapping us between the two of them. If I hadn't been sure I was safe, I might have worried. What can I do for you? The man behind the desk asked. He had dark skin and close-cropped dark hair that was starting to gray. I'm looking for Mr. Echelon, I said. My name is Nicki Wilson, I called last week. I'm Andre Echelon. I was visiting your territory on business and wanted to pay my respects. He looked intrigued. Where are you from, Nicki? Safford, it's on the eastern side of the state. I was aware that a lot of people, even native Arizonans, had no idea where Safford was. I'm familiar with it. He looked at us. Who's this with you? This is my husband, Devon. I waved my hand in his direction, and our friend, Gavin Waters, one of our PAC's enforcers. Echelon nodded at Devon, but his eyes narrowed slightly when I introduced Gavin. You've changed some since you left, moved up in the pecking order. Yes, sir, I have. Echelon turned back to me. Why do you merit an enforcer when you travel on business? Well, my face heated. I feel like I should let you know that I have 2 enforcers. 2, he asked. Yes, sir, Devon is our Theron. Echelon scowled. You must be pretty special to warrant not just the Theron, but an additional enforcer. I've had a bit of trouble, sir, and my husband and our Aniquitos wanted to make sure we didn't have any here. He looked at me, considering. It wouldn't be, at least in part, due to your relationship with your Aniquitos, would it? I shrugged. I can't deny that I have an uncommon relationship with Bill. He's like a second father to me. I would be lying if I told you that it wasn't a factor. He looked at all of us again. Nicki from Safford, he paused as if waiting for something. I've heard of a Nicki from the Safford pack, but her name wasn't Wilson. You wouldn't happen to be the same Nicki, would you? I took a breath and let it out slowly. I wasn't sure what he'd heard, and I didn't know if it was good or bad. What if I admitted it, and he decided we were a threat? Devon and I got married last weekend. My maiden name is Daniels. What's the business that brings you to Yuma? He asked. I felt myself blush and wished I could stop it. Well, sir, it's actually twofold. He lifted one brow, waiting. I'm in charge of acquisitions for an antique shop in Safford. I came to town to look at some items I'd seen online. And the second reason, he asked. I wanted to meet the owner of the second-hand shop. I looked at the merchandise she had listed online and found something worth looking at in person. He was silent a moment, looking from one member of our group to another. You came to see Natalie Watson. He seemed certain. I glanced at Devon, unsure. Yes. Have you already met with her? Yes, sir. I said. I had an appointment yesterday to look at several items in her shop. He was silent for a moment, watching me. So, can you do it? Surprise held me silent for the space of several breaths. I had always explained what I had in mind, and that it was indeed possible. It took me more than a few seconds to switch gears and think about how to respond to his question. I think I can, but there's something different about Ms. Watson, and I'm not sure how it's going to affect my ability to shift her, should she choose to try. What's different? He waited patiently for me to tell him. I looked at Devon, wondering for a moment how much I should tell the man in front of us. So far, when we find a non-shifter, we engineer a way for me to meet them, I began. Engineer? The first we needed to meet was a tour boat operator in Seattle, so we scheduled a tour. I paused. Then there was a genealogist in Texas. I hired her to do a family history for my parents for Christmas. This time, she runs a second-hand shop, so you find something in her shop you want to look at. The Aniquitos said. Exactly. Do you even work for an antique store? I do, but if I didn't, I would find another reason to go into her store and meet her. That wouldn't be too difficult, would it? No, it wouldn't, I agreed. Anyway, I've learned all I need to do is to touch someone to see if I can sense their animal form, but with Ms. Watson, I encountered something I'd never found before or even heard of. The Aniquitos watched me, waiting for me to tell him what was different about his non-shifter. I sensed not one but two animal forms inside her. The older man looked a little surprised but not shocked. Could you tell what the animals were? I shook my head. It didn't occur to me to try. I've never encountered a kitsune that took any form other than wolf. Never? I gave a wry chuckle. When you consider that my experience in the shifter world has only been the last 6 months, it's not all that remarkable. True. He admitted. Anyway, she's potentially got two animal forms. The trouble is, I'm not sure how to approach that. I'm certain I can call either one, but I'm unsure what will happen with the second. So, what do you need from me? Your permission to offer her the chance to shift if she wants to try, and permission for our healer, who also happens to be our Harmonia and travels with her enforcer, to come here to help me with the actual shift. We'll also need some place to do the shift. I see no problem with any of that. Good. I have an appointment this afternoon to pick up the items I purchased from her shop. I'll see if I can talk to her then, make the offer. All right, the pack leader said. If it's all right with you, once she makes her decision, I'll contact my Harmonia and have them look into heading this way and call you about a location to do the shift. That's fine. I'd like to be there when you shift her, if you don't mind, he said. Assuming she decides to try, I don't mind your presence at all. The local Anikitos has been present for all 3 of the shifts I've done so far. One of them brought their healer along as well. If that's something you'd like to do. That would be difficult, seeing as we don't have one. I scowled. Don't have one? I thought all packs had a healer. I'm afraid not, he said. Anyway, let me know what she decides, and I'll be happy to supply you with a place. I didn't know what to say. I felt bad that they had no healer, especially living so far from any other pack. Granted, Yuma was a city and there were plenty of normal medical professionals in town, and more, half an hour away across the border with Mexico, but the closest kitsune group was 3 hours away, unless there was one across the border. For the first time, I wondered what shifters there were in other countries. Logically, I knew they had to have them, but it was simply something I hadn't thought about. Shaking myself back to the present, I got the local leader's personal number so I could let him know what Natalie decided, and we took our leave. As we left, he asked Gavin to hang back a moment. Gavin looked to Devon for permission. Devon nodded and continued out the door and to the car with me. Gavin joined us at the car a couple of minutes later, climbing in the back seat without a word. On the way down the driveway away from the house, Devon glanced at him in the mirror. Was that something we need to be concerned about? No, it was personal. He felt like he needed to warn me that one of the girls I dated while I was here is mated, and for me to leave her alone. Was there going to be an issue? I asked, curious. No, I left because we were potential mates and I wasn't ready to settle down. And he felt the need to warn you off now? Devon asked. I had to admit, 7 years later was a bit long to think he was ready to come back for her. Gavin looked down for a second and his face reddened. It might have more to do with the fact that she is his daughter. You were potentially mated to the Anikitos' daughter and walked away? I said, surprised. Gavin nodded, seeming reluctant to talk about it. Let's just say I was young and stupid. I wasn't as nice as I could have been about it, but I wasn't a total bastard either. I left before it went very far. The separation was uncomfortable at first, but not painful. You call this leaving the area on good terms? Devon asked, giving Gavin an unhappy look in the mirror. It wasn't on bad terms. I spoke with him before I left. I didn't run away in the middle of the night. I told him what was going on and why I was leaving. He agreed it was for the best. Devon sighed and they both fell silent as we headed back into town. As we pulled into the rental agency to get a trailer, Devon's PCD rang. He sent Gavin and I inside while he stayed in the vehicle to take the call. By the time I'd completed the rental agreement and headed out to hook up the trailer, Devon was waiting to help. I didn't ask what was up while we worked, but as soon as we were in the truck, pulling away with the trailer, I couldn't hold out any longer. "What was that about?" I asked. "What?" Devon said with a slight frown. "The call." Oh, he maneuvered the small SUV and trailer through traffic, heading for our appointment with the shop owner. "Jessup has gone missing." It took me just a moment to remember that Jessup was one of the men suspected of killing Annie. "Missing?" Gavin asked from the back seat. "Yep," Devon replied. "He didn't show up for work. His truck is parked in front of his apartment, but it's empty, no sign he's been there in a couple of days. They haven't found anyone who's seen him in the last 48 hours, either. It's like he just vanished." "What about Anderson and Garza?" Gavin asked about the other two suspects. "Still there, going to work and living their lives as if nothing has changed," Devon answered. "That's odd," I commented. I wondered what has happened to Jessup. Had he caught on that he was one of our prime suspects for Annie's murder? Had he left town to avoid being killed for it? I couldn't wonder about it long. We were almost to the little second-hand shop.